This Tales of Destiny retrospective was brought to you by my lovely patrons on Patreon. For as little as $3 a month, you can get your name shouted out at the start of every Xenosanctum video, as well as get access to bonus behind the scenes content. Despite a rough development cycle, the Tales series was off to a solid start with Tales of Phantasia. By 1997, the Super Nintendo had been superseded by Sony's brand new PlayStation console, which was taking the world by storm and was quickly becoming the #1 place for JRPGs, and Namco wanted a piece of the pie. However, without the original creators of Tales of Phantasia, could Namco and Wolf Team create a solid sequel? Note, the following section is not well sourced and likely contains errors. Following its problematic development, Tales of Phantasia would go on to be a moderate success, selling just under 230,000 units. Despite not selling like crazy, the game had received a large amount of praise from reviewers for its battle system and presentation. Thus, the possibility of a sequel was on the table, but without the original creators, Wolf Team would be hesitant. That hesitation would soon be put to rest when in 1996 Square Enix would unveil their latest entry in the Final Fantasy series, Final Fantasy VII. This game soon took the gaming world by storm due to its cutting-edge 3D graphics, and global interest in JRPGs reached an all-time high. Not wanting to miss out on this new JRPG frenzy, Namco would immediately task Wolf Team with creating a new Tales game so they too could have a big JRPG on the PlayStation. Like Final Fantasy, Wolf Team decided on making a brand new universe for their new Tales game with a completely new cast. However, the team decided against using 3D graphics for their game due to their inexperience in 3D game development. Instead, they would keep the 2D format from Tales of Phantasia. To account for the game's lack of 3D visuals, the team would instead try to push for more voice acting, as well as getting animation studio Production IG to create an anime opening for the game. Eiji Kikuchi would again direct the game, however, due to Yoshihiro Gotanda's departure, a new writer was needed. Thus one Kazuya Ishizuka would be employed to write his first ever video game script. Gotanda wouldn't be the only replacement. In the arts department, Kosuke Fujishima would be replaced by one Mutsumi Inamata. The story that Ishizuka would develop would be based around the destinies of the main cast of characters and their sentient weapons they wielded. As a result of this, the team decided to name their new game Tales of Destiny, and would give the game the characteristic genre of Fateful RPG. This would start a trend in this series in a similar manner to the battle systems, in which each Tales game would have its own characteristic genre. Namco would show off the game at the September 1997 Tokyo Game Show for a December 23rd release date. Hoping to maximise sales, soon after its first announcement, Namco would reveal an English version of the game for NTSC territories for a mid-1998 release, but no PAL version. This made Tales of Destiny one of two English Tales games, the other being Tales of Legendia, with no European or Australian releases. With their original staff gone, Wolf Team would now have to show not just Japan, but the US too, that they could make a worthy sequel to one of the Super Famicon's greatest JRPGs. The story begins when two guards discover a stowaway named Stan Aileron on board their flying ship, the Draconis. The guards take him to the captain, who puts Stan to work scrubbing the decks. While scrubbing the decks, monsters board the ship and begin slaughtering the crew. Fleeing for his life, Stan hides in a dark storeroom, only to find himself face to face with a talking sword named Dimlos. Dimlos reveals that he is what's called a Swordian, and offers to partner with Stan so they can escape the ship, which they do via an escape pod, crashing into a frozen lake. When Stan awakens, he finds himself in a log cabin, and is soon greeted by Gar Kelvin, who had rescued him from the lake. Gar inquires where Stan came from, to which Stan answers. Gar then gives back Dimlos, who has suddenly gone very quiet. The two are then approached by Gar's teacher, Master Alba, who is looking for his granddaughter Chelsea Torn, who went deep into the mountains. Stan offers to help, and Gar and the two head into the forest to find Chelsea. The two find her resting under a tree and explain that she needs to come back home. Chelsea is initially reluctant but eventually agrees, and the three head back to the cabin. Upon getting home, Gar inquires where Stan is going, to which Stan replies that he's heading towards Dariashield in the kingdom of Seingald. Gar then offers to take Stan to the border town of Janos, where he can find passage to Dariashield. Arriving in the town, the two part ways, and Dimlos begins talking again, revealing that he didn't trust Gar, and thus kept quiet while in his presence. Stan soon finds himself stuck in town since he lacks a pass to get into Seingold, but is soon approached by a woman named Mary Argent, who is in desperate need for help as her friend is in trouble. Stan offers to help and the two go to some nearby ruins, where Mary's friend, Ruti Katria, is trapped inside some kind of glass cube. After breaking her out of the cube, the three are then ambushed by Seingold troops who accuse them of trespassing. Escaping the troops, the three rush back to town and go to the inn where they properly introduce themselves. Ruti reveals that she too has a swordian called Atwhite and is travelling the world to make money collecting lenses. They had been in the tomb to retrieve a cane of a man in Seingold and invite Stan to join them. Stan agrees and now with a passport is able to leave Janos and head north towards Harmens to deliver the cane. At Harmens, Ruti returns the cane but not before bullying the man for an additional 5,000 gold reward. Following the extortion, the three decide to relax at the local inn before heading off to another job. When they awaken, they are confronted by Seingold troops led by one Leon Magnus, who also wields a swordian named Chaltier. Despite only being 16, Leon is able to wipe the floor with the three and arrest them. The three are then brought before the king of Dariushield, who plans on having them executed, but upon realising that they are swordian masters, the king's advisor instead offers to put them to use investigating disturbances at the sterilized temple. The three are then fitted with shock tiaras and are sent off to the temple along with Leon to keep an eye on them. At the temple, the team is shocked to see the place ransacked and the temple staff hiding in fear. Making their way into the vaults of the temple, Leon is shocked to find the Eye of Atamorni, a magical device with the power to destroy the planet, missing. Instead, all they find is a petrified girl. Using a panacea bottle, Leon is able to revive the girl, who reveals her name to be Phyla Felice. Phyla then explains that the Eye of Atamorni had been stolen by the High Priest Lindon Berhart. The group then returned to the capital along with Phyla to report to the king that the Eye of Atamorni had been stolen. Horrified, the king immediately tasks Leon to go and find Lindon and reclaim the eye, along with the other swordian masters. The story continues from there, and for the full story I have to recommend a different channel this time, as Oni Blackmage hasn't covered Tales of Destiny. So instead I'll recommend the Brotherhood of Gaming, a pair of Tales fans who have done an excellent two-part cover of the entire story of Tales of Destiny. From a first glance graphically, it doesn't feel like much has changed since Tales of Phantasia. While a Super Famicom could not possibly deliver graphics on this level, it still feels like it could have. Characters still retain their chibi body proportions with small bodies and oversized heads, and towns and dungeons still retain their traditional Super Famicom look. The story too follows a very similar beat to Phantasia's one, although no time travelling this time. We'll come to that later. However, the story does feel a lot more linear, especially in the first half, with few points of divergence in which the player can complete multiple tasks at their own leisure, such as the Spirit Quest in Tales of Phantasia. This is also driven by the sheer amount of sailing the party will have to do, with the world being made up of a lot of small islands. The one big difference from Phantasia is in the overworld, which is now in 3D. Kind of. Your characters are still 2D, but the overworld now has 3D mountains, as well as an Earth-like curvature to it. Not only is the overworld in 3D, but so too are the battle scenes. However, I did not even realise this was the case until my characters began using certain spells. Speaking of the characters, due to being designed from the ground up by Inomata, the characters now have a much more anime look to them than they did in Tales of Phantasia. This allows them to look a lot more expressive throughout the game. This expression is not just seen in the sprites, but also the script too. Characters now have way more personality, from Stan's whimsical adventure spirit to Ruti's money-hungry persona, to Leon's edgy lone wolf demeanour. Speaking of the cast, the game now has a whopping 9 playable characters. Along with the aforementioned 7 characters, you will also meet Carol Sheehan, a bard from an aristocratic family who is on a quest to avenge the murder of his lover, and Bruiser Kang, an arena champion who joins your party after wanting to get stronger upon losing a fight to Stan. 6 of the characters can be in your group at any one time, and only 4 can be in the battle party. All party members can equip gear to increase their stats, but certain restrictions are placed on which equipment can be put on which character. 5 of the 9 characters are Swordian Masters. Swordian Masters can wield each other's Swordians as well as generic gear. Like the characters, Swordians will level up too, which will improve their stats, as well as unlock additional spells for the wielder to use. This means only characters with equipped Swordians can use spells, which also makes Stan one of the few main Tales protagonists to be able to use spells. Swordian Masters can also use special discs to improve their stats as well as unlock additional spells. Due to their advantages, it kinda makes Swordian Masters more desirable in the party than regular fighters, and I mostly stuck to a party of Stan, Ruti, Phyla and Leon until the second chapter, in which I switched over to Gar. Alongside the characters, the food bag returns along with the annoyingly high encounter rate, made worse by the lack of places to buy holy bottles. On the bright side, you can now run without needing to equip anything, making travelling times much faster. One new feature this game has is lens collecting, in which the party can collect lenses from defeated monsters and then sell them at select places for a varying amount of gold depending on the current exchange rate at the time. Tales of Destiny uses the Enhanced Linear Motion Battle System, or ELMBS, for its combat. Much like with Phantasia, battles still take place on a 2D plane and occur in real time. Enemies will still normally appear to the right of your party, although ambush spawns, where the enemy appears behind, seem to be a lot more common here than in Phantasia. Battles have seen quite a few changes, not least of which includes the new aerial attacks. By pressing circle, Star will run up to enemies and do a slash attack. However, stab attacks are now conducted by holding down, while holding up will result in an aerial stab attack. As a result, flying enemies are now much easier to hit. TP costing skills are back again as well, now called specials, but now linked to the 4 directional buttons, rather than your proximity with the enemy. Specials are assigned to be used via the X button with the D-pad in the neutral, up, down and across positions, which has practically been the standard for the series ever since. The game also adds a targeting system allowing the player to tap R1 to select different enemies. However, I barely used this since the game always targeted the nearest enemy, which is who I always go for. Meanwhile, L1 is used for mirroring the party's orientation. This is kind of fun as it ends up working a bit like a charge button, causing everyone to rush at the enemy you're fighting. In an iconic switcheroo from Phantasia, we have gone from a party of one swordsman to a party full of swordsmen. Your other members now have their own tech attacks and can fight on the front line rather than just cast spells from the back. This more melee focused combat has also benefited from Square on the controller now acting as a dedicated block button, thus removing even more of the random elements that plagued Phantasia. Player control has also been advanced even further with the addition of manual control, in which when a technical ring is equipped to Stan, he will no longer run at the enemy when the attack button is pressed, instead giving full movement control over to the player. However, unlike in later games, I found battles worked best while Stan was still in his default semi-auto control scheme, and thus I didn't really use the technical ring. Along with special attacks, Swordians can also use a range of TP costing spells. Unlike in the later games, rather than being assigned like specials, spells are instead conducted off the battle menu. In the fast pace of battle, having to pause the game to select a spell is not very intuitive, and I tended to just leave casting up to my AI partners. Speaking of the battle menu, it has been greatly expanded from Phantasia. First up, you have the previously mentioned spells. Second are your specials, which you can toggle which specials the AI party will use, as well as reassign your own specials. Third is command, where you can order the AI to go all out, heal, leave it up to you, defend, avoid using spells and specials, and finally retreat, which is how you flee battles in this game, as opposed to running to the edge of the battlefield. Fourth is strategy, which will determine how the AI will play normally when it comes to who they target and how they attack. Fifth is order, which will allow you to space out how your party is arranged. And finally, sixth is items, in which you can use in-game battle items, which thankfully work much faster than they did in Phantasia. Since everyone can mostly wield the same weapons, there isn't too many differences between the different characters' playstyle, outside of a few different special attacks and spells. As the protagonist, Stan has access to the largest variety of specials, but without discs is limited to just a handful of fire spells with dim loss. Despite her thief-like nature, Ruti is actually the healer of the party, with White giving her most of the game's healing spells. Leon plays like a cross between Stan and Ruti and has several earth and dark spells at his disposal. Phyla takes on the role as caster when she gets her Swordian Clement, who unlocks some of the most powerful spells in the game. The last of the Swordian Masters is Gar, who initially started as a bowcaster before getting his hands on the Swordian Tenos, which will allow him to cast a variety of wind attacks. Along with the Swordian Masters, the 4 other companions consist of Chelsea, who like Gar also wields a bow and can supply suppressive fire. Mary can basically wield most melee weapons by the Swordians and takes on a tank-like role. Kate meanwhile uses his fists to pummel the enemy into the ground. Arguably the most unique of the group is Carol, who lacks any real offensive abilities and instead will support the group through his music. Unfortunately, despite all the party members being fully playable characters, you'll be permanently locked to playing as Stan. However, by finding channeling rings throughout the game, you'll be able to equip them to the other party members, allow them to be controlled by other players, giving the game a basic co-op play. The setup for such play is difficult, involving the use of the PlayStation multi-tab accessory, even for just 2 players, and the fact that the battle screen will remain focused on player 1, which will frequently lead to other players having to fight off screen. To sum up, battles have seen a whole bunch of small improvements over Phantasia, despite somewhat feeling the same. We still aren't quite there yet with the fighting game feel the later games are known for, but with the other characters now able to fight at close range, we're definitely getting into faster paced battles. And with fast paced battles comes fast paced music. Motoi Sakuruba is back again from Phantasia to compose the music for this game, along with Shinji Tamura. Now with the superior sound chip of the PlayStation, the music has definitely seen an uptick in quality, both in sound and compositions. Generally there seems to be a bit more life in Destiny's soundtrack when compared with Phantasia. This is most notable in the overworld theme, Unfinished World, and the brand new battle theme, Bared Fangs. This could have been a result of the cleaner sound chip in the PlayStation, but I generally found the compositions to be superior in this game, even if not as iconic as Phantasia's top pieces. Despite not having access to CD storage sizes, voice acting remains limited to mostly battle, outside of a few moments. Despite now having an official English translation, the game retains its Japanese voice actors, since outside of attack names there is no complicated sentences that would require an English speaker to make sense. But I can't really talk about the sound of this game without mentioning the game's anime opening. J-pop band Dean would be brought on to perform the game's opening song, Yume de Uni, Like a Dream in English, which has gone on to be one of my favourite Tales opening songs, from its slow steady rock beat to its beautiful piano runs. It's an utter shame that this piece would be removed from the US release of the game due to issues from copyright and the fact that Japanese opening songs weren't really the norm in the late 90s. As a result, Destiny's opening would be replaced with an orchestral arrangement, which, while not bad, pales in comparison to Dean's amazing song. The act of removing the Japanese opening song and replacing it with an orchestral piece for the Western release unfortunately would be the trend for all Tales games until Tales of Vesperia in 2008. While Phantasia gave birth to the Tales games, Destiny establishes it as a series. Tales of Destiny might feel and play very similar to Tales of Phantasia, with only minor improvements. However, these minor improvements are numerous and goes to show how the small things do matter. For starters, the story feels more original than it did in Phantasia, and a lot of that comes down to the characters bucking the stereotypical archetypes. Stan is definitely a much more interesting protagonist than Cress, and the same goes for most of the other core cast. The benefit of the anime art style also has gone a long way to giving more personality and character to the story. Battles are arguably where Tales of Destiny has improved the most, with attacks feeling a lot less random and more controls being given to the player. Allies now also being able to fight up close has sped up the pace of battle, and the multiplayer, while not the most intuitive way to set up, was still a cool addition that would be a highlight for the series going on. Looking at you, Arise. But I cannot say that I didn't feel underwhelmed with this game. After 25 hours of playing Tales of Phantasia for the last retrospective, this game kind of felt like another 25 hours of the same game, just with minor improvements. This definitely killed my passion to finish the game, and that's partly why this video took so long to come out. Let's just say there's a reason why the PS2 version of this game is talked about way more than this version. While the PS2 version brought forward one of the best 2D battle systems in the series, this game kinda feels like Phantasia 2.0. My issues with Tales of Destiny would also be expressed by fans back in 1997, and as a result Namco would take their time on the next entry to make sure that it would be a big step up graphically and gameplay wise, and the fruits of this would come out in time for the new millennium, as I come back next time to talk about the final game in the original Tales trilogy, Tales of Eternia.